So as software engineers, the thing that most of us are trying to do is get very deterministic results out of our software, right? We want X to always behave like X. If we put it in a function, we always want it to have the same behavior. If we create a div, it should look a certain way. And with all these new tools coming in, there's a lot of productivity that increases. Like I type in, make me a website. It takes about 2 seconds for this thing to do about 3 hours of work, where I'll get a really nice website through any of this tooling. But the problem is the results vary. And that's what I'm hoping to tackle today, right? These AI-based tools are inherently non-deterministic. How do we tame them a little bit? And then how do we get them to actually work with us? And here's the classic example, right? You go to 2 different systems or 2 different days in the same system, and you say, write a function to authenticate a user. You might get number 1 or the second one. Has anyone come across something like this before? One, two, three. All right, good. Moving up in the numbers. And then, you kind of have to figure out, okay, there's different ways to manage your error handling. Your return structure is different. You could have different logging practices. You could have any kind of unpredictable patterns, right? And then sometimes you try to overcorrect, where you'll have this description file where you'll try to say, for a function like this, do X, Y, and Z. But then you're starting to write the code almost as if it is your description. And that's also problematic, right? Because then you are essentially doing double the work. You're not getting the flexibility gains that you ought to get. And then, unfortunately, what ends up happening is you spending so much time in your cursor file that you get frustrated with this thing. It's never going to work. It's just not going to give you the kind of value things that you need out of it. And so I'm still tinkering with the name, but a lot of different people have done a lot of great work in how to try to tame these systems. There's a lot of YouTube videos that I'm going to point to. And if you don't have the links from the previous talk that I've given, I'm happy to share those links after this talk as well. Just ask. And it comes down to a few things, right? You want some kind of API consistency. If you're using a certain version of the API, you want to stick to that. You don't want your code to randomly destroy everything that you're looking at, right? Once I get to about 10,000 lines of code, I start to see these mystery disappearances in my code, right? Like you make a change, you make an edit, and all of a sudden, a previous functionality is no longer working. You don't want that either. And then you also want, let's say I make a change for a specific function in one part of my code. It might have cascading effects. That function might be used in other places, or the same type of problem might show up in different places. One really great example of this that I just over the weekend dealt with was on Azure Cloud. I had fixed a problem that you need to Dockerize. You need to push the changes through Terraform to Docker, and you need to get this thing actually working on the cloud to test it. But I was going through this loop where I tested in one place, but I didn't test it in I didn't run the same thing in 3 or 4 different places. And the end result of that is basically that instead of testing my code once, I'm kind of just hitting next, because it's going to try to make those changes throughout the file. And that's not really productive either. I need to figure out this cough thing. 1 second. Somehow I need to, because that can't be fun to listen to, guys. I'm so sorry. Anyway, so what I ended up doing was I ended up changing my core cursor rules file, and I didn't know if it would work. I just said, hey, if a file has a change that might cascade to other components, and cursor does a better job of this than Windsurf, but if you put in the actual core files, and I'll share my versions of both the global files and the workspace specific files with you guys. If we can make those changes happen and then just check every single time, the consistency, just putting that in your rule files goes significantly higher, right? And then obviously you might have some gains, like there's certain type of function calls that just work better, or there's certain kind of behaviors that a part of your cloud does a much better job of handling, and you start to sort of slowly pull those in. And so I think we've established this. If you use the pattern before and kind of start to fail, you start to see the same kind of issues again and again. So a structure, like what might a structure for or cursor rule look like? Has everyone used cursor rules or like some kind of rule sets here in the past? Okay, I got a couple of questions I'm going to take a quick pause for. Why do I prefer Windsurf over Cursor or others? The reason I liked Windsurf really was because their agentic mode was the most consistent for me early on. And I try not to switch tools every single week. A new tool comes out literally every single week. I've tried Cursor, I've tried Cody, I've tried Windsurf, I've tried Copilot. In fact, I helped implement Copilot at Johnson & Johnson when it first came out. And it was great to use. And for them, I wouldn't change that tool at all. But for me, Windsurf just gives me a really nice integration. And I kind of like that they're moving in the MCP direction. They have this integration now with MCP, which basically allows you to, let's say you have a Slack channel in your dev group. You can actually run that through MCP. You can use an existing server. And then all of the knowledge in that is accessible to you through Windsurf right away. And that's kind of the reason that I'm sticking with it. That's a relatively new feature, but overall, it has been very consistent. And also, I've noticed that, at least for me, and some of this might be in my head, right? Because the underlying models are exactly the same. The amount of consistency in the number of like deletions that I've seen are a little bit better, at least for me, on Windsurf. And the biggest win when I got Windsurf was there was no limit. Cursor, I think the first time I ran it, it ran with me on over a weekend on a hackathon. And then I came across a top level limit. Whereas Windsurf, at least for now, I haven't been in a position where I've run out of credits ever, right? Because I just have their pro plan. Granted, it's more expensive, but I never want to see that limit. And that's been a huge piece. In fact, that's the reason I moved away from some of the other tools as well. Another question was, sorry, does that answer your question, Ishbir? Perfect. And then Hendrik asked, agentic mode does too much and destroys a lot of things. Absolutely. I agree. So you can guide this thing to try to give you, in part of your cursor file, less issues like that. Like, I think my initial file said something like, please make sure you actually have to delete a thing before you delete a thing, and like look it over or something like that. But that doesn't really do the job. We have to be ultimately in charge and look through all of the changes. And this is more of a behavior problem, right? Once you start seeing so much code coming through, you have a tendency, at least I have a tendency, that, oh, 300 lines of code were changed, check, 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 move on. But I've made it a new practice for myself that I always look at the diffs being made in the Git itself, right? And Git Lens is a great tool for that. They'll show you all the changes real quick, or just have your little visualization of Git open in the left corner and just see what it's trying to delete. If it's trying to delete, you can just see the pluses and minuses. If you see that minus number being a little bit unusual, definitely look at that file. But as a habit, I look at the file anyway. And we'll get more into the structure. But here's an example of the beginnings of a cursor rule file. Like, based on the same example, always use try catch. Log errors before rethrowing. I promise this cough was not nearly as bad like 15 minutes ago. I think this is partially nervousness, but we'll figure that out. Return consistent structure, validate responses. So this does the non-deterministic component, right? It will give you much better results. And then of course it's on you as the human in the loop to actually make sure that that's being followed. And if it's not, you have to make some changes. And that's kind of the tricky part. Where am I losing enough productivity where it doesn't make sense for me to do it anymore? But consistently I've found that get a huge boost in initial productivity, but as my project gets more consistent, I have to be a little bit mindful of how I structure and how I make my changes. And I try to make my changes not too broad. I define a set of features. I define exactly what my overall architecture should look like. And then I create a checklist. And in fact, any of these tools will mark things as checks for you, because you can take a behavior-driven development approach, and it'll go through each feature, and it'll make sure that all of those features are consistent. Because one of the beautiful things about using these tools is that now TDD/BDD is not nearly as much of a pain. And so you can implement those and change your testing strategy in a really meaningful way. Now we can have the test that we've always supposed to have. Sometimes, we didn't have the time for that in the past, but you can use those as your guiding light for how you code. Let's see. So yeah, here's just an example of like 2 different ways to prompt, and any of you can figure this stuff out. You can name it different ways. Again, this will get you 80% of the way there. You'll still see the same kind of issues, and you just have to keep an eye on those code changes. And one really beautiful way to make sure that your code stays consistent is define behaviors that you expect, and have your checklist where those behaviors consistently need to pass. Some people will go into, functional tests, integration tests, and unit tests. Some people will just define the behavior at a high level where they'll say, these are the behaviors I expect, but the end result should be the same, right? Your unit test should always work. Your integration should always work. And if you're moving on to the next step with those things breaking, then you're not coding anymore. You're just kind of clicking through like an exercise, kind of like mindlessly. And it's so easy to get that way because you're now getting thousands of lines of code coming out. It's really, really easy to think that that's where your productivity lies, but it's a red herring. That's not where your productivity lies. You'll still be 2 to 3 times faster without all of that, as long as you keep an eye on your code. Is that meaningful for everyone here? Very good, very good. Ooh. Okay. These slides are something I, by the way, pulled together really quickly based on my notes on what I was going to do in Windsurf anyway. But I'll save the overall idea. I think I've been talking to the same exact thing. Balanced approach, be really brief but comprehensive, focus on the architecture and the edge cases, and opportunity for course correction when things like that happen. The things that I've been talking to is basically what this slide says. Some new functionalities also coming out in these toolings. For example, Windsurf has this concept of memories, right? Where during the course of writing code, and I really wish I could show this, you can tell Windsurf, hey, this is really important to me. It seems like the last 3 times you tried to write this function, you used some weird API call. This API call we worked through the last couple of times works. Remember that this works. And it'll add it to its memories, which is a really nice functionality, because that's really where it's really starting to shine and like giving you much, much more consistent results. So that's all memories is. You can do a lot with it, especially as every project is going to have like specific memories, like funky calls. In my case, what I do is I check for the time for my logs, right? Because sometimes it'll pull in logs that are no longer relevant because it's looking at logs that are like 200 lines in the past during a debugging session. But I always want to check against the current time of the logs to make sure that it's trying to correct a problem that's a real problem. It's a simple thing to do, but it drastically improved my productivity, especially when I was Dockerizing and the logs could easily get stale, right? Oh, another thing that I do is if I'm working on like an open source project where I know there's existing issues that I'm not going to be able to tackle, like I don't want to necessarily tackle those right now, I'll actually collect all of the pull requests as well as all of the issues. I'll condense them into an LLM. I'll create a sheet out of that, and I'll feed that to the IDE to keep in mind. Sometimes our purpose is to work on those problems themselves, and someone has figured out half a solution or they're close to a PR. We don't want to do that work, especially for open source. And sometimes we just have to, kind of be able to see problems that people have already tried to address in certain ways, like, oh, Terraform doesn't work because of X, or oh, Bicep doesn't work because of Y. And if you just take that, in fact, take the Discord chat too, and then just try grab anything meaningful in there, and then condense that into something meaningful for you. I think it's a small little tip, but it's really helped me out looking at really large projects to try to avoid big issues and like trying to circle around the drain. Yeah, so this is my little hack that I use. It's drastically sped me up for lots of problematic issues, and quite a lot of times people like build out solutions that they point to in Discord, and I've been able to utilize that to speed up my coding. So this is based on work that a lot of people have done, right? This is how you kind of write your prompts. Everyone here knows about some degree of how to write prompts, but here's a version that literally the LLM helped me put together as a pattern. I said, these are the things I do. What do you think of it? And it said, let's call it the spec pattern. And then I wouldn't be surprised if this has been used before. But the idea is exactly the same. I think pretty recently, one of the founders of OpenAI, I think it was, they laid out a very similar idea where like you define the scenario, right? You ask for specific things that you want out of it. You, for your specific use case, define any like exceptions or things like that. And then you tell the system what your constraints are. And if you set up your prompts that way, you'll get much, much better results. Okay, then I kind of went into this comparison. For me, someone's asked, Windsurf Y, Cursor Y, or GitHub Copilot Y. This was my experience. In fact, my experience with GitHub Copilot is kind of old now. I think it's gone through a lot of updates. But basically, I felt that Windsurf needed the least amount of guidance to get the most consistent results for me. I don't work for them. They don't pay me. This is just my experience. And I do think Cursor keeps up really, really well. It's just been a matter of, I don't want to pay for two things at once all the time. So I try to stick to one tool at a time, especially because when I'm evaluating tools, I pay like something like $500-600 a month. It gets to be a lot, right? I paid like $50 for both the first time it came out, $200 for OpenAI. And I do that so I can do talks like this and try to share my experience with folks about like which one worked in XYZ scenarios. There's a million YouTube videos out there. I'm actually going to share my favorite ones with respect to Windsurf and Cursor. And so hopefully that's useful for you guys as well. Yeah. Let me see what I was trying to think about this one. Yeah. So yeah, this is standard, but hopefully it's useful for someone who's kind of new to utilizing these tools. Don't try to define the implementation. That's not the job of a prompt. That's your job. Your job as the engineer is now turning into like checking the implementation. Just define the interface. Sometimes, you can communicate the structure without writing a lot of typing a lot. And you can be fairly structured, but not increase your workload to get really, really good output out of these things. And let's see. Implementation strategy, yeah. Test guidance level on small tasks. That's yeah, this is exactly right. Build a small program or 2 or 7 first before you start tackling something with more than 10,000 lines of code. Try to get your structure, whatever works for you, right first, and then work your way up from there. You'll find, just like I found, that telling the system to utilize my specific API calls for, especially for diagnostics, was very much easier than having it circle around the drain. Just like I found that pulling some stuff from open source code was really, really useful for me. You're going to find your own patterns and hopefully share them with the rest of the community on what really worked for you. And as the models change, some of this will also get better. 3.7 just came out, and apparently it's boss at doing a lot of things that weren't even possible just a couple of weeks ago. And then finally, refine. So that's the gist of it. Let's see. If you do things in this way, where you're not trying to just pass through a bunch of code in the beginning because it must be right, you're going to maintain that engineering discipline that you have. Even if you're learning a new technology, you can at least note down the things that look iffy. You're going to have much better code quality because you're taking this behavior-driven approach that all of these things must pass consistently and all the time. And if something's breaking, or if you're seeing a lot of red lines where your code is breaking in a lot of places, or like it's just deleting a bunch of things, you'll catch them earlier. Like day one of me doing that versus me doing that today, I immediately know if it's trying to cut some code. But day one was a pain in the ass because I was like, this is kind of useless. It does all this stupid stuff that I don't want it to do. Like agentic mode really destroys too much. I quit Replit because it kept circling around the drain. But all of these tools are getting better. In fact, Replit's gotten significantly better. Just today, they came out with a mode where all that planning phase that I talked about, they set that as a separate step. And I think that's going to be fantastic. And as you get better at this, your inconsistencies will reduce, and you'll start to see that you're not just like 20% faster. You're at least twice as fast as you ever were coding the natural way. And finally, here's the high level, idea. You still need deterministic results. You have this very non-deterministic system, depending on the model, especially churning out very different results. And you need to tame it to do two things. One, maintain that increase in productivity, and two, give you very consistent results. And there's a bunch of strategies that I've gone over to do stuff like that. More will be uncovered. I'm sure I haven't covered all of them, but that's the gist of it. If you are in a world where you're at least a software engineer, a couple of the teams that I've trained, they're like, this stuff is absolute garbage because it gives you different results all the time. You can't trust it. And that's really not the point, right? The person to trust is you. You're the gatekeeper. The point is whether the tool is making you faster or not. And these are all tips to make you faster while getting better code results. And certainly more secure code because you're testing much more consistently. That's the gist of it. Any questions?
We have a few in the chat, yeah.
Oh, please ask.
So
Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, I can read them out if you want.
Yeah, please.
So Johan was asking, have you used Eider or Devin AI?
I haven't used Devin, but I have used Aider, and I really liked Aider. It's just I didn't stick with it. The version that I used was an earlier variation. And it was basically, I went to a demo, I saw it, I tried it, and I haven't tried it again. I couldn't give you a very good reason for that. It's just that these mainstream tools happen to do the job for me, and they're part of my learning process. And again, with new tools coming out all the time, it's really hard to try every single thing without losing focus.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Johan. We also have one from Oliver. Has Windsurf a limit of code line?
I'm sorry, what?
Oliver is asking whether Windsurf has a limit of code line. You know?
So this is a really good question, because I think what you're asking is, do they maintain the context? If that's the question you're asking, Olivier, yeah, okay, good. Context used to be really crappy just last year. I think the upper limit that GitHub's free version, even right now, has, as of like my last discussion with a DevRel, was about 5,000 lines of code. But the way Cursor and Windsurf, and I think now even Copilot, are collecting context and then making changes to it and taking the parts that they think is important, and getting rid of the other things. What they're essentially doing is taking the underlying models and they're adjusting the context in such a way that it's kind of like a layer of checking to make sure we only keep the most useful stuff, and that kind of increases your context even beyond the core model's ability, in the sense that they're just being much more selective about what's important. And to that end, they're getting better and better. Surely there's still limitations, but I've tested Windsurf and Cursor to at like 100,000 level, 100,000 lines of code, no problem. I've heard from colleagues and people that I've worked with that they touch million lines of code with these tools. And as long as they're structured about their approach, they don't delete stuff, they're not supposed to, they're having great results. So it's getting better and better.
All right. Also, Johan is asking, have you used Amazon Q?
I've only seen the demo for Amazon Q. I know the guy who's in that DevRel group. He's a fantastic person. I think he helped develop some of that code too. At least I know another person who helped develop that code. AI Camp did the talk around that subject. I haven't personally used it. I've only seen it demoed. But both Q and I think it was CodeRabbit showed up in the same talk. Both of them look very promising.
All right. Eugene is asking, have you used CodeStral from Mistral?
No, I haven't. I would love to someday. But CodeStral?
Yep.
Mistral. Eugene, do you have, by the way, feel free to unmute yourself. Do you have any experience with CodeStral? I kind of want to hear what your thoughts are. In fact, folks, when you have questions, if you want to talk, please unmute yourself and feel free to get involved. I think that's where the most value of these sessions comes, if you can be heard. And if you can, unmute, let us know.
Yes, I can. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm considering using it, and I've seen a variety of tools. That's why I was wondering whether you've used it as a comparison.
I'm a huge fan of the mission of Mistral. So if you can get it working, I would love for you to get involved in like the last 5 minutes of one of these AI Camp talks and give us a little demo.
Right.
If I find the time, I would love to. I think, like I said, there's so many tools. It really is a community effort to be able to condense all of our knowledge together. And that, for me, that's a huge point of AI Camp.
All right. And I guess the last question comes from Mario. Do you have a good tool which takes layout designs from Figma or similar and would create the perfect UI for that?
Actually, the tools are inherently getting good at that, right now. At least if you can take like the design layout from Figma as an image and feed it to any of these tools, which includes Windsurf and Cursor, at least at that level, they're very, very good at converting that into something meaningful. There are specific toolings that I use, and this is really technology specific. There's this thing called Design Studio with Qt, which is like a C++ framework that does GUIs for embedded systems. That actually pulls in all of that code and then works within. They have a custom model, like a 13 billion parameter model that they use inside their IDE, which is called Qt Creator. And that is a really nice interface because you get a lot of the artifacts from the Figma layout, as well as like its description and some of the animation stuff too. But that's a unique case. Like that's a paid tool.
All right. I think people are now just discussing different tools. I think you can move on, Devinder.
Oh, yeah, I want to know. Actually, I would love to hear from people about not just questions specific to tools, but like if you're having some issues getting it involved in your work, or if you're excited about a specific tool that you tried, if you want to show us real quick how you tried it, we'd love to see that.
All right.
Like right now. Also, it keeps me from talking, which I'm sure is getting annoying with all my coughs.
Yeah, people are discussing CodeStral and yeah, different tools.
Yeah, DeepGram is something that I've heard about. No, this has been. I think I kind of blame my coughing right now because usually what ends up happening is folks have a lot of questions. Anyone here who's not used these tools at all? Like, are you brand new to utilizing code assist tools, AI tools in your coding? Oh, everyone here is okay.
I am brand new to this, so
Okay. Do you have some questions about for all of you folks who are brand new to this? Because I went over some stuff after you get started, right? Do you have some questions about getting started with them?
I think I've started dabbling with Cursor. So that's the first thing that I'm trying out right now.
Okay.
Really a newbie to this, so yeah, I mean, I did not get time to experiment it. Probably in the further sessions, maybe I can
Yeah.
ask better questions.
So if it's helpful, what I was asked the last session was, what are my global files? What are my Windsurf files? So I'm going to share them as both a LinkedIn post and as a notable. So please find me on LinkedIn, and you'll have like access to that. I think if we can, we'll try to get Bill to also send out like an email to everyone who attended. I don't know if that worked out well the last time, but it's something we'd like to do. But I'll make sure that whatever things that I've learned in terms of like those tiny little things as you get started, you have access to some of that to hopefully help you along the way.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I saw like 4 more people. Any other questions? Yeah, Madhu, please go ahead.
Hi, I have a question. Do you suggest any model that we can host internally on premise for code, like suggestions or something like Cursor or Code Llama? I've tried OpenAI, Gemini, and Code Llama to generate code, and I've written a Medium blog on that. But I'm wondering if there is some model that we can host internally using Code Llama or something, and use it for code generation purposes. Like, do you come across anything?
Yeah, my first experimentation was with a Llama 3 billion parameter model. It was not nearly as good. Then I tinkered with a Llama 70 billion parameter model, which was actually fairly good. But now I'm starting to see companies actually roll out custom 13 billion parameter models that do a fairly good job of this kind of thing. So you just have to kind of search around, look at Hugging Face and see what's out there. But there's a ton of like these custom use cases. Like sometimes I need something specifically for one thing or another, and I use those. The other use case that a lot of folks have is sticking it on the cloud. Like it's local to you in a sense that it's on your cloud tenant, or your company's cloud tenant. And I've actually implemented that for a few clients, and they're very happy with that scenario as well, because they have a little bit more. You can do some more interesting stuff with RAG. You can do some more interesting stuff with security in terms of like who should have access to certain amounts of data, has access to that data. And so that's been very, very successful for quite a few of the businesses I consult for. So both approaches work depending on how strict your work is.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, please, Tara.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you have any experience with like COBOL language, because in my organization they don't have many people knowing this language, and they really want to implement not a chatbot, but this Copilot thingy that help the developers. Any idea which one is better for COBOL? Thank you.
So you might have to do some hunting and testing yourself, because I don't specifically write in COBOL, and there might be specific like Hugging Face models that are especially suited to that. But my recommendation is choose one of the large models to start with, see how it behaves, and then run an instance on the cloud, feed it your data, internal cloud, right? Like your company's cloud tenant. Feed it some of the data of like the good code in your business, like where there's some good practices going on with your code, or like well-established code, kind of like how you would with RAG, vectorize it. And then look at the output of that, because if you are like a lot of different people who have specific use cases, they're seeing a lot of success with those niche use cases that they have. Doesn't necessarily need fine-tuning. You might be able to take like the foundational model with its vast knowledge, plus sort of a little bit of this grounding that you can do in COBOL data. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah,
but Hugging
thank you.
Face might be a great start too.
Sorry?
Hugging Face, like they have a bunch of models. They might have something specific to COBOL.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. By the way, this question I get a lot is it secure? Each of these models make certain guarantees. Each of these IDEs make certain guarantees about being safe. The most enterprise friendly so far that I've seen has been Copilot. That's how I got it implemented at a much larger org where I've worked previously. But Windsurf also makes some guarantees about not only taking account information and nothing else. So if you talk to their enterprise team, you might get satisfactory answers. For us, I just connected my team to our attorneys and our IT department. Then we came up with some guidance on like what kind of training people need to have, what kind of secure guarantees Microsoft gives. And they're a little bit vague about it, but they tell you, you own your code, which, assuming that, someone else with some GDPR or like some code doesn't come after Microsoft themselves, you might be covered well with, given the guarantees that they give you. There's a little bit of gray area, but it's like any other tool in terms of like how you balance the productivity you're getting with the security that you're getting. And I think especially the enterprise offerings are getting better and better at that. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. The name is Cursor. Yes. That's exactly right. What's your website? Is it cursor.com or cursor.ai? Cursor.com. Yeah, cursor.com. Local DeepSeek R1405. Yeah, I mean, DeepSeek does a really, really good job. But if you can run locally 4 or 5 billion parameter model, even with distillation, I mean, that's a hefty machine. So good on you.
Akash has a question.
So basically, I have a question like, what is the process of like hosting on-premises code generation model? And like, is it worth pain to take the pain to host it? And because we have to develop an interface, right? So is it like good to go in that approach or like go with third parties software like Cursor?
Yeah. One more time. What is it that you want to host? A model?
So basically on-premises code generation model, like LLM, like as previously someone mentioned, right, in the call.
Yeah, you can do it. It's not a huge lift. I think the connecting, you have probably like a couple weeks worth of work ahead of you, but it's doable. I just haven't found as much value in than using some like an on-tenant secure run foundational model like OpenAI or something like that through like your cloud provider.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, someone made a good point. Let me share what my LinkedIn is in case you want this documentation. I'm going to share it in the chat, okay?
All right. Paula says that I'm not sure he or she works in super regulated space healthcare, and we got Copilot approved. So
yeah, Johnson & Johnson MedTech, we got Copilot approved. I worked in the medical robotics division, and it took some talking to a lot of people. It took some leadership approval. The broader organization was already working towards something, so there was some momentum. So we, pushed for that, and then actually getting to use it in workflows. That was a discussion about like a tactical approach in a couple of like low impact areas first, and that's around the time where it took its own wings and I went my separate way. Yeah, that's a fantastic. That's exactly what I mean by like you can run like local LLM in the cloud with Amazon SageMaker. Yeah, those on-tenant approaches tend to be the easiest and secure way of getting approval, as well as getting something up and running that your whole org can use. Isolating it to a server can be more of a pain to manage all of that yourself. Something like a container app or like a Kubernetes or Terraform managed service where you have a lot of control over like the underlying app as well as your SageMaker, or what does it call it? Foundry, Azure Foundry, and that kind of thing, or Vertex AI. Those are the big three. Susie gave a shout out to TED AI. Yeah, I love those people. Anything else, folks?
Yeah, no questions on Discord. So yeah, I don't see much.
Okay. We had 12 minutes, so I'll stick around, coughing and everything. If you have specific questions about how to get your cursor up and running, or your Windsurf up and running, or if you have a very specific problem you want to talk about, I'm here. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming. Oh,
Yeah.
Johan, what's up?
Yeah.
Hi there. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Very good presentation. Thank you so much. I was wondering as well what your flow was for, like if you're asking Cursor or Either or whatever tool to do the coding for you, it's automatically fixing linters and those errors, but you usually have to like run the code for actually finding runtime errors. And then the most common way is that you take the error that you have and you send it back to the chat interface. I got this error, and then you have to keep on doing this. But there are other ways to do it. I was just wondering if you had a good workflow set up already right now.
Yeah, I first of all, depending on like the language pairing that I use, I'll probably define like a global cursor rule, or in my case, a global Windsurf rule file first. That'll have some of those examples, or even like it might even suggest like how to lint or what approach to use for my coding standard. But typically, what I do first is ask it not to write any code for a while, because I need to lay out the idea. So I write a bunch of READMEs where I define what needs to happen first and what needs to work. And usually it's 2 or 3 READMEs, because otherwise they get too hefty. The first README defines the overall architecture. The second README focuses on any particular implementation, like this needs to be on the cloud, or this needs to have some kind of CUDA kernels. And once we get those READMEs done, I pick one of the things on that README to get done. Let's say like a basic infrastructure for your MongoDB app, or your your server, and I say let's get that working first. And of course, you'll still run into errors sometimes, but these things know how to set up the grounding framework really, really well. And then obviously, because I use the behavior-driven approach, it has to pass a set of tests to be able to move through that, right? And once it passes that first set of tests, where like, we have something working on localhost, then we move on to the next step. That's the approach that I take just about every single time. I'll almost never write code right away, just because I want to know what I'm writing first. And figuring out that idea with the tool also helps me embed some memories early on that might be useful down the road. Is that helpful? Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm going to see if I have an example.
So I don't see any new questions popping up anywhere.
Okay, the next question, if we still have a couple of people left, that I have for you guys is, what do you, I really took input from what folks wanted to hear in the last talk and use that to guide what I would talk about in this talk. So if you have some input on what you didn't get out of this, what you thought you wish I covered, or what you wish, you just thought of that would be great to cover, please write that down in the chat for me, or like just speak up, and I'll try to make sure that happens the next time. Obviously, hopefully I'm not coughing like a madman the next time as well.
I think you're all right there, and they're just, everyone's, happy to hear about AI tools, so no worries.
All right, great. Thank you. Oh, there we go. I'm so glad.
Yeah, please, Devinder, go on.
Thanks. Cool. I appreciate you all. By the way, Susie, I want to hear more about that TED AI, so please reach out. I tried volunteering with them last year. Didn't work out. Maybe I didn't meet the right people. Thank you. What are the most useful agentic use cases you're using? And what frame version do you use? It's a good question. In terms of agents, I'm not doing too much work other than implementing simple agents. We're trying to figure out what kind of evals we need to run to have like really good repetitive results. And it started out with really simple custom models that did a really good job of like OCRing that other models weren't doing. And then we knew that we needed to use certain paths that were not deterministic. And that's where agents came in. But I'm a little bit not as mature in that space, to be honest with you. Pedantic, yes, we've used Pedantic. No, not the other one though. But that's a great thing to chat about at a different time, Johan. I think I'll try to make a talk around that topic. Yeah, please, and please, if you have any questions, please reach out. Find me on LinkedIn. I try to answer every single question I get. I think that's the most value that anyone can get out of these things. It's the most frustrating part when someone doesn't answer your questions. And if I don't know, I'll point you to someone I know, or I'll point you to some research that I don't know, or I'll just tell you I don't know. But I would love to try to answer all your questions. Yeah. MCP servers in Cursor. I haven't tried it, honestly. I've only tried it in Windsurf. And it was a nice little implementation. I don't know that I couldn't do it manually, because essentially you could take like chats or whatever and plug it in. The nice thing is it's continuous, and that MCP server will help you get that continuous data out of it. It's exactly on the surface like agentic behavior. So I have more to tinker with, but it's a nice convenience. Oh, when I'm on code, I love GitLens. GitLens is one of my favorite extensions because it lets me, anything that'll let me keep a really sharp eye on the progress of my code, that's my favorite thing, because that's where most of my scrutiny needs to go right now. So GitLens is my favorite one. Oh my Lord, where'd my water go? Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Yeah, Mehmet is asking about your...
I'm just Dev Sodhi. I think the only thing I've released recently is like an open source version of like a cute get up and running with your what is it called? Your GUI / backend interface. That's just because it's a technology I specialize in. I used to work for the Qt company and we helped release that framework as an open source thing. But most of my client work is private. So you might see like a couple toy examples or something. If there's anything specific you want to see, we can talk about it, because I'm often dealing with existing code that I have to tinker with. It's just that I can't share too much of it because I work as a consultant. Oh, yeah. Your code should be self-documenting, and that should be part of your global cursor file rules. You'll see that in any of the example files that I share, specifically with respect to your global rules as well as your workspace rules. And because code is changing so much faster, you should be able to, that should be part of your structure for your definition rule file. Oh, you guys missed my little lovable thing. But yeah, by the way, that presentation took like no time at all. I just used Lovable to quickly come up with a presentation. I'm gonna look in Tater for sure. Cool. Thanks, everyone. We're about 2 minutes away from the time. I'm gonna close this out at exactly 10 o'clock. Thanks so much for coming. I appreciate all of you.
Yeah, having you. And
yeah, no, I literally said I used Lovable, which is an AI to generate the slides. Yeah. And thank you, Inza, so much. Please, I don't think I did a proper slide, but AI Camp is a great community where we share a bunch of this stuff. You came here through them, so I assume you know about them, but come